Morning guys, evening guys, afternoon guys. Welcome to this episode of the Bionicle Inspiration Series, the series where we talk about mocks from the community to help inspire you with something that you might currently be working on. Now this episode is on elements, and you might be like, I don't really know what that means. Well, essentially what I mean by that is mocks that are more heavily inspired by some element, whether it's an element from the Bionicle universe, whether it's just the typical elements, or even some of the elements on the old periodic table. We're going to be talking a little bit about mocks that have been very much based around that sort of thing. And also, this sort of slightly relates to round one of Bio Cup. So hey, if you're here for that, hopefully I can inspire you with your next entry, and you can take home the cup, or at least get a good place in round one. So let's begin with the mocks that we have today. This first mock is by Oscar Cedarwall. This mock is by Oscar Cedarwall, otherwise known as Ooga. And this mock is called Guardian Gollum. Very, very cool. Love this mock. So, first thing, straight off the bat, I guess this mock is essentially, if we're to refer to it as, what element it's sort of representing, you could argue that it's representing, well, in the Bionicle world, I guess you could argue that it's representing air, but I would say more it's representing Earth. It's representing, although not Earth like it is in the Bionicle world, Earth as in like Mother Nature, garden, tree, life, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, so you could kind of argue a whole bunch of different things that this is representing, but tree, for lack of a better term, or if this is Pokemon, grass type. Now, something that I think is extremely effective with this mock is that it uses a lot of the Chewbacca parts from the old CCBS Chewbacca set. And by old, I mean it's like a year old at this point. It's actually surprisingly a very recent set. But the texture on these pieces is very tree-like. Surprisingly, obviously, it's meant to be a fur texture to represent Chewbacca himself. It works very, very nicely here as the sort of bark on a tree. And you even see the Chewbacca head here used on the jaw. And man, the texture on that part looks exactly like tree bark. It's awesome. And what a great way to shape that mouth and that jaw there. It's very, very cool. Or as Chewbacca would say, for those of you who speak Wookiee, you'd understand what I said. So I think that's really cool, is taking pieces that maybe have a more unique texture, or even using some of those pieces where you might look at it and go, gosh, how the heck am I going to use that? And I know a lot of people have thought that with the Chewbacca. They're like, oh, this is cool, like, great, pieces in brown, awesome, but geez, I don't know how I'm going to use it with that specific texture on it. So maybe you can repurpose it to look, like something related to some sort of element, or even not, who knows, see what you can do. Something else I really like about this is the amount of life that is given to this mock by adding the Mixel eyes on there. There's so much personality with this. Like in this really beautiful picture here, you see the little kid holding up the flower to the tree, and the eyes convey so much personality here. He kind of looks a little bit apprehensive, like, whoa, I don't know if I can trust this kid, but oh my god, look, a flower. He looks adorable. It's really, really cool. And just adding that little hint there, just with that Mixel eye, really makes this mock pop and gives it so much more life and personality. I think that in itself is really, really cool. Something else that I think is really cool is just the subtle system highlights in this mock. Whether it's the little kid with with his little wheelbarrow wagon and his dog, or the flower, all that sort of stuff. It's just a fun little addition to this photo that makes it even more presentable, more fun. But also on top of that, the system highlights of the bark. There's a few things like lightsaber rods and stuff like that for the bark, and then you could argue that the leaves and the flowers and stuff, of course, that is system. I guess you wouldn't argue that it's system. It is system. But it's really cool. It's a nice little addition. Maybe if you took that away, it's a little less obvious that it's a tree. It could just be like a furry monster man. But you add that and suddenly this is a tree monster. Kind of like an Ent. And hey, there's something else as well. Make sure to look at pop culture if you're sort of struggling with something for some kind of elements mock, You have Ents in Lord of the Rings. They're big tree people. There's all sorts of stuff from various pop culture things. The list could go on, but I ain't referencing none of it because you yourself probably already know. Look for your video games, look for your pop culture, look to your movies. There will be some examples there that you can go, oh, I could build something like that. Or heck, you could even just build a straight up version of that character. Why not? One final thing that I really like about this mock, and then we shall move on, is the toes on this mock. Again, using some system parts there. Very, very nice piece. And it's cool just how those toes on the feet really look kind of like roots sinking into the ground there. It's a very nice, subtle addition. It just works very, very nicely. It's a very, very cool. Let's move on to the next mock, which is by Red. And this mock is called Wicker, Creature of Fire. So obviously this is a revamp of the Creature of Fire Lego Bionicle G2 set that we got. And this It's a beautiful revamp of that set. I absolutely love it. So again, we were talking a bit before about looking towards pop culture. Well, in a way, you can kind of do this. Because obviously, the set itself has been reimagined as more of a phoenix, which I guess you could argue that it kind of was a phoenix to begin with. Or just a firebird, I don't know. But that in itself, look towards your myth, your legend, your stories, even Harry Potter, all the sort of stuff that has had a phoenix or any kind of mythological beast or bird or whatever, or animal. Doesn't even have to be an animal for that regard. It could be, again, a person, a figure, a god, who knows? Often the elements play a large role in there. Heck, you could even make some Bionicle versions of the Titans from Hercules and Disney. I loved those guys as a kid. Very, very cool. And those guys are very elemental. But besides the point, there's a good place to look for a bit more information. Heck, or just build Jean Grey, because technically she's a phoenix. Anyway, jokes aside, let's talk a little bit about the mock. So, it's used some of these Chima fire pieces, which ironically were actually used as wings on a mock. Or not a mock, a set for that matter. So that is cool in itself. And it's beautiful how well these are incorporated with the rest of the mock. The red being pretty much the main color on this mock, very subtly transitions into the yellow here, and it's not even that difficult the way that he's done it. He's literally just built a very red bird, and then when he gets to the wings, the red in itself transitions to yellow because that's how the part works. But it looks very, very beautiful and very, very nice. It's so cool to not see any other yellow anywhere else on this mock, except on parts where there's flame, or on the beak for that matter. But again, the beak would normally be a different color because that's pretty much the case with most birds. So it's beautiful how he's done some of that color blocking and some of the playing with color there. It's absolutely awesome. I love it. Something else I love is the other little highlights of fire. You know, using some of the trans orange kind of on its back and its neck, and even adding in this little sort of system fire flame printed part there. It's just some nice little additions that help kind of remind you of the fact that, hey, this is a firebird. And I think that's beautiful. The overall shaping on this is great. Obviously, he's just taken a good look at some pictures of some birds from the real world, or maybe he has a bird of his own and he's studied it a bit as he's building. And I think that in itself is, well, very, very smart. It's a great way to, really match the overall shape and proportions and get things to look accurate so that you look at it and it is very obviously a bird. So that in itself is very cool. It's also cool, you can sort of see here in this photo kind of how he's done the wings. It's just simply attached there with some balls and sockets, and then it sort of stems off of that Borax shield piece there, and then it's just sort of a series of these sort of connecting parts, and he's added in some various axles and pins and things, and that's how the flames have been connected. It's surprisingly simple and actually pretty sturdy too, which is very, very helpful and very, very cool. Also really, really love how he's done the eyes here using those microscope parts. Very, very clever. Almost looks like he has goggles, but it also just kind of looks like a more pronounced eye. It's very cool. I like that. And something else that I really love is this additional picture here where he's on a little bit of a diorama. And yeah, it uses a decent amount of system, but it also uses a decent amount of Bionicle too. And I think that's very cool. Again, it really sort of represents the element. He's sitting over a pool of fire, obviously in his natural habitat. Some very nice piece usages here, like with the flick fire, spring-loaded missiles, whatever you want to call them. I suppose they're not flick fire missiles. Kind of one of them is sort of popping here on the side with the lava. Kind of looks like a lava bubble has burst. You got all these other system dishes and things looking like lava bubbles and things like that. And then you've got this tree here, which is made basically entirely out of tires. Some of them have been inverted as well. You get a totally different texture with those tires, and it's a really, really nice technique. And then he's simply probably layered some, Hero Factory bones or various connector parts and things like that to get the shape of the tree. And then it's just sort of sprawled out there looking like a dead on fire tree, and it works so well. Again, it conveys a nice story, it conveys a lot of personality, it fits with the mock, and you get a very good sense of fire, which is obviously the element of this mock. I don't even know if I said that yet, but it is. So very, very cool. Very, very great way to convey that. And also something else that's cool, obviously a phoenix is sort of something that's sort of implanted in myth and legend and stuff like that, fairy tale, whatever you want to say. So that concept is well known. But heck, if you look at the Lego sets, Chima combined fire and a crocodile. Two concepts that I never thought I would see, and yet, there they were. So, the possibilities are endless. Look at any animal, look at any element, and see if you can combine it. Even if it's not even necessarily in a clever way, like a firebird, kind of seems like it would work kind of well. Feathers, depending on the way that you look at it, could look a bit like a flame or something like that. So, that in itself sort of lends itself hand in hand, but, a crocodile and fire, maybe not so much, but I guess Lego made it work somehow. So, hey, see what you can do. Just mash things together. See what happens. Throw things at a wall and see what sticks. Anyway, great work, Red. Love your work. Let's move on to the next mark, which is by Joxon, and it's called Old Murgle One Eye. Awesome, awesome mark. I love this. This is a bit more of a different take on the element. It's, before we saw very, very primarily fire on the bird, or before we saw very obviously bark and leaves and things on the tree guy. And, you could argue that the element is very obviously present on here, whereas this, it's a little less the case. There's technically no water at all. But you've sort of taken aspects of the element and applied it onto this mark. So obviously, again, the element would be more sort of water. And something that I think is really cool about this is, hey, he looks very much like a fish, or a little bit like a pirate. Two things that you very, very easily associate with water. Could easily see this guy living under the sea. Very, very cool, and a very unique way to convey water as an element. So let's talk a bit about how he's managed to do that. So yeah, obviously he's taken inspiration from various different fish and aquatic life. You can see on his feet here, he's got a webbed foot design, which is awesome. It looks like that's connected, and I can't say I know how, but it's very, very cool despite that. Taking these minifigure flipper pieces and putting them in with these old Mystica, Fantoka, claw parts creates a perfect looking webbed foot design. Very aquatic, very, very cool. Speaking of very aquatic and very cool, he's got an eye patch, which isn't necessarily aquatic, but it's pirate-like, which you associate them with the sea, so that works very nicely. He's almost sort of personified it in that sense. It's very cool. And something else that I really, really love is the sort of angular fish inspired mouth. He's got all the big scary teeth that you would typically see on a scary underwater creature, and he's also got these fins coming out on the side of his head, which in a way kind of mirror the legs, and again has that sort of webbed aquatic feel. Very, very cool. Mimics fish, works well. A couple other things that I like is the pot belly that he's got. Very, very clever. It looks to me that it's one of the... It's not that. It is a system sort of semicircle piece, I guess you could call it. I'll throw up a picture of what it looks like. Here it is. So it's that part there, and sort of tying it in with the tire underneath that really helps to create this sort of pot belly design. It looks great. Again, it kind of fits with that sort of pirate look. It also sort of fits with, maybe kind of like a toad. They're kind of a little bit more naturally kind of chubby, fat looking, and yeah, it just works, and for whatever reason, that really, really conveys the theme, as does the color scheme too. It looks slimy, it looks aquatic, it just works. So yeah, some very, very clever ways to convey water as an element without actually using the element. Very, very clever. Take a look at the things that relate to that concept, no matter how obscure it is, or even if it's sort of a bit more subtle. Sort of a nice way to kind of address that. Very, very cool. Let's take a look at the final mock here, which is by our man Gringat the Repugnant, and this mock is called Verax, Toa of Iodine. Now, something that was cool about this is this was entered into the old periodic Bionicle contest in 2012, and there are a couple of those over on mock pages, and I'll post a link of that in the description. And I don't know, the coolest thing about that is it was an entire competition about making various Toa, Rahi, Matoran, Taraga, whatever you name it. There was a round based upon it, and yeah, it was making a bunch of them, but their element was related more specifically to an element on the periodic table. So for example, we built, Rakshi that were made of phosphorus, or Taraga that were formerly Toa of iron, something like that. More sort of obscure elements that aren't a part of the Bionicle story, but then you're making Toa that represent them. Or not necessarily Toa, Makuta, any kind of being. It was very, very cool. So hey, if you really want to just take a nice stroll down, not really down memory lane if you weren't there, but hey, if you want to take a nice stroll through a whole bunch of mocks that relate to specific elements, there's a whole contest filled with them. So there's a lot of examples you can look at there if you need a little bit of extra inspiration. So let's take a little bit of a look at Verax. Man, this used to be one of my favorite mocks when it came out. Absolutely awesome, and it still is. It looks fantastic. So the way that Gringat has related iodine as the element to this is, let me read through the description he says here. So he says, iodine is a halogen, one of a group of 7 in the periodic table, and an element I've studied extensively last year in chemistry. Basically, it reacts the same as chlorine, fluorine, and bromine, or fluorine, as they say. I messed that up last time and I did it again. Never mind. So it is a black crystalline solid at room temperature, but turns directly into purple vapor when heated without being a liquid. Solutions of the stuff vary from yellow to brown to red to purple. In pure water, it's red, which is why a lot of there is a lot of trans red on him, and he tried to sort of keep a bit of a spiky look, hence all the scrowl parts and the claws and things like that, but he also wanted to give him some tubes and tanks for a sort of gas apparatus, if you will. He's bulky because iodine is a big atom. In fact, it's the largest element in use in the human body. So there you go. Now, earlier on in the description, but this was more relating to his story, he was saying that iodine is a deadly gas. I don't know if that's true or not, because if it's in the human body, we should be dead. But I don't know. I'm not a biologist. Some people are probably face-palming right now. My bad. But I still like that idea. All of that stuff directly relating in a more sort of subtle way. It's a little less, I guess you could say, obvious, as some of the other mocks were relating to the element. He's taken some of the more obscure aspects or some of the actual components, the fundamental things relating to the element itself, and managed to reinterpret them in some fashion on the mock. And I think that in itself is really, really cool. Literally taking some of the colors that it appears in and putting it in the mock, and taking, kind of studying its appearance. What does it look like? How does it work? And then also applying that to the mock in some fashion. I think that in itself is very, very clever. And it's a great way to create the personality and a great way to create the overall feel of the mock. You know, obviously he's a bad guy. He's a Makuta. I think he was a Makuta. I don't know. It said in the relating it to the Bionicle storyline that he was banished to the pit, but now he's broken out. He's a mighty evil Toa of iodine. My bad. There you go. So that in itself is very, very cool. A great way to relate it back to things. Let's talk a bit quickly about the mock. So, something that I absolutely love is how he's used so many of these Stronius parts on here. And even some of the Skrull parts too. Obviously, both of them were technically Skrull. I believe, yes, they were. So, very, very cool to see that sort of consistency in using those pieces, whether it's on the legs or the shoulders or the back there, all sorts of things like that. Very, very cool. And also so cool to see those Stronius masks used there as shoulder armor. It works perfectly. Who would have thought that Stronius armor on shoulders worked so nicely? Very nicely done, good sir. And another thing that's cool as well is this custom mask design built around a Metru head. How cool does that look? That's awesome. And even just its natural shape kind of looks like a bit of a gas mask, to some degree. And I think that's cool, because like he said, he was sort of relating to it in its gaseous form, so it works very well. And also having all these sort of tubes and jets and things on his back kind of relates to how he's interpreted the element. Very, very cool. So yeah, 4 fantastic mocks from 4 fantastic builders. Each of them have in some way embodied the element of their choice into their mock in 4 very different and unique ways. I think that's very, very cool. So if you're building a mock and you want to make the element sort of a very key factor to how the mock works, or you really want to build a mock that relates to an element in some fashion, maybe that can actually be the spawning point for the idea. So yeah, get your science hat on, study up, see what you can learn, or even just, I don't know, walk around at the beach and then suddenly be like, haha, I could make a hermit crab with a shell that spurts water like blastoids. Yeah, and then there you go. You've got a cool elemental theme idea. So there you go. Hopefully this episode helped you guys out. If you want to submit some of your own mocks to the show, you of course can. Be sure to look at the links in the description to my social media. Those links are the places where you can submit a link or something of a mock of your choice, or some themes of your choice. Submit away, always happy to hear. Also, be sure to check the links in the description to the mocks that you saw in today's episode, and check out some of the other awesome things that these guys post and do. Hope you guys can get a little bit inspired from this episode. Happy building. If you've watched this because of the BioCup Round 1, good luck. May the Force be with you. I'll see you in the future. Happy building, guys.